He was a duke, bound by duty, legacy, and the crushing weight of a name that had shaped kingdoms. She was a governess, invisible, expendable, a shadow in gilded halls. Their love was forbidden, impossible, the kind of scandal that could destroy families and end careers. But when Alistair, the 8th Duke of Blackwood, looked into Ilara Vance's eyes for the first time, he saw something no title could give him: freedom. What follows is a story of stolen glances and whispered confessions, of a man who renounced everything for love, and a woman brave enough to believe she deserved it. This is the story of the Duke who chose the governess over his entire family, and the price they both paid for daring to want more than the world would allow. Will their love survive the fury of a dowager duchess, a dying child's plea, and the merciless judgment of society? Stay until the end to find out. Before we begin, if you love epic romance stories full of passion, sacrifice, and impossible choices, hit that subscribe button right now. You're about to spend the next 2 hours with characters who will break your heart and put it back together again. Welcome to the channel, and I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. Let's build a community of romance lovers from every corner of the globe. Now, let's dive into Blackwood Manor, where everything is about to change. The silence in the Duke of Blackwood's library was a living thing. It was old, woven from the scent of decaying paper, lemon oil polish, and the slow, heavy tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound like a patient, waiting heart. Alistair, the 8th Duke of Blackwood, stood by the towering bay window, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. The liquid was untouched. Outside, a persistent autumn rain wept down the leaded glass, blurring the manicured gardens into a watercolor of greens and greys. His world was a place of straight lines and hard edges, of duty, legacy, and the crushing weight of a name that had shaped kingdoms. Yet his eyes were not on the sprawling lands he commanded, nor on the ledger of accounts open on his mahogany desk. They were fixed on a scene by the fire. She sat on a low ottoman, the hearth's golden light carving her profile from the room's shadows. Ilara Vance, the governess. A temporary fixture, he reminded himself, a necessity to manage his orphaned niece and nephew until a more permanent, a more suitable arrangement could be made. But the word temporary felt like a lie. She was reading to the children, her voice a low, melodic murmur that barely disturbed the room's profound quiet. It was a thread of warmth in the cold, cavernous space. He watched the way she held the book, her fingers long and delicate against the worn leather spine. He watched the firelight catch in the intricate knot of her dark hair, finding strands of mahogany and bronze he was certain no one else had ever noticed. She was not beautiful in the way of the women he knew, the diamond-dusted debutantes and flawlessly coiffed ladies of the ton. Her face was too serious, her eyes too intelligent, holding a quiet depth that seemed to understand the world's sorrows. She was invisible in the way a servant was trained to be, her grey dress a shadow against the room's rich tapestries. And yet to him, she was the only thing in focus. This is a weakness, a voice in his mind, cold and sharp as his father's, warned him. A momentary, foolish distraction. He gripped his glass, the crystal groaning faintly under the pressure. He was a duke. His life was a map, drawn by others long before his birth. There was no room on it for uncharted territory, especially not for a woman who earned a wage under his own roof. He forced his attention away, turning to the rain-streaked window. He saw his reflection superimposed over the dying gardens, a man tall and broad-shouldered, imprisoned in a perfectly tailored coat, a ghost in his own home. "She is teaching them Latin, you know," a voice said from behind him. He didn't startle. He had heard the rustle of silk slippers on the Aubusson rug, a sound he had associated with scrutiny his entire life. He turned slowly to face his mother, the Dowager Duchess. She stood by the doorway, a severe, unyielding column of black silk and disapproval. Her eyes, the same shade of slate grey as his own, flicked from her son to the scene by the fire, her lips thinning into a bloodless line. "It is commendable," Alistair replied, his voice a low baritone that held no warmth. Far more than her predecessor managed. "Commendable, perhaps, but necessary? The girl Amelia will need to master the pianoforte and French, not dead languages, And young Thomas should be preparing for Eton, not having his head filled with sentimental poetry by a woman whose lineage is unknown. The unspoken accusation hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. A woman who is beneath you, beneath us. Ilara must have sensed the shift in the atmosphere. He saw her shoulders tense, a subtle straightening of her spine. She did not look up, but her voice, as she continued reading, lost a fraction of its gentle cadence. She was aware of them. She was always aware. Her lineage is of no concern, Alistair stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Her competence is. The children are happier than I have seen them since the accident. The mention of his brother's death was a weapon, and he wielded it without flinching. It was the only thing that could silence his mother. He saw a flicker of pain, ancient and raw, in her eyes, before she masked it with her customary iron will. "See, that competence is all you are concerned with, Alistair," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It was not a piece of advice, it was a command. She gave Ilara one last dismissive glance before turning and disappearing into the gloom of the corridor. The clock in the hall continued its merciless ticking. The air in the room felt charged, the silence now brittle. Alistair's gaze returned to the governess. The children, sensing the tension they could not understand, were growing restless. Ilara closed the book gently. "That is enough for today," she said softly, her voice a balm on the room's frayed nerves. "Amelia, Thomas, go and tell Mrs. Gable that you are ready for your milk and biscuits." The children scampered away, their fleeting lightness a stark contrast to the weight that remained. Now Ilara was alone by the fire. She rose, her movements graceful and contained, and began to tidy the scattered books. He knew he should leave. He should go to his study, finish his whiskey, and lose himself in the familiar, sterile world of ducal responsibility. He walked toward her instead. Each footstep on the thick rug seemed unnaturally loud. She heard him coming, of course. He saw it in the way she paused, her hand hovering over a leather-bound copy of Virgil. She turned to face him only when he was a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes cast respectfully downward toward the floor. "Your Grace," she murmured. "Miss Vance." The formality was a shield for them both, a chasm of etiquette and class that was supposed to be uncrossable. "My mother informs me you are teaching the children Latin." He saw a flicker of something in her. Was it alarm? Fear? "I felt it would benefit Master Thomas's future studies, Your Grace." "If I have overstepped, I apologize." Her voice was steady, a carefully constructed wall of professional calm, but he could see the faint pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. "Don't look at her throat," he commanded himself. "Don't notice the impossibly soft skin there." "You have not overstepped," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Their education is in your hands. I trust your judgment." For the first time, she lifted her gaze to meet his. Her eyes were the color of moss after a rain, deep and green and startlingly clear. In them he saw not the deference of a servant, but the assessing intelligence of an equal. It was terrifying, and it was intoxicating. The silence stretched, thin and taut. He felt a primal, reckless urge to shatter it, to say something real, something that was not about Latin or his mother or the children. As if sensing his thoughts, she broke the contact first, turning back to the stack of books. "Thank you, Your Grace." The words were a dismissal, a reminder of her place and of his. In her haste, she fumbled. The heavy copy of Virgil slipped from her grasp, landing with a soft, dull thud on the rug. Instinct took over. They both bent to retrieve it at the same time. The world narrowed to that single point in space. His large gloved hand, accustomed to holding the reins of a stallion or the hilt of a sword, reached the book at the same instant as her small, bare one. For a heartbeat, their fingers brushed. It was nothing, a ghost of a touch, but a bolt of heat, sharp and electric, shot up Alistair's arm. Through the fine kid leather of his glove, he felt the impossible warmth of her skin. He smelled the faint, clean scent of lavender and soap that clung to her. He saw the way her eyelashes, dark and thick, cast tiny shadows on her cheekbones. Her breath hitched, a sound so quiet it was more felt than heard. She pulled her hand back as if burned, her entire body recoiling. She straightened up, her face pale, her composure finally, irrevocably, fractured. He rose slowly, the book in his hand. He held it out to her. His own breathing was unsteady, his heart hammering against his ribs with a savage, unfamiliar rhythm. "Miss Vance," he said, and her name felt strange on his tongue. Intimate. She took the book, her fingers carefully avoiding his. "My apologies, Your Grace. I am clumsy today." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "It is of no consequence," he replied, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. Without another word, she turned and walked swiftly from the room, her hurried footsteps swallowed by the grand, empty house. Alistair stood alone in the firelight, the echo of that fleeting contact burning on his skin. He had built his entire life on a foundation of control, of discipline, of unshakable duty. And in a single accidental touch, a governess had shown him he was standing on nothing but fault lines. Ilara did not stop walking until the heavy oak of her own door was closed firmly at her back. She leaned against the cool, unforgiving wood, the latch digging into her spine. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. She pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes, but the image was burned onto the darkness behind them. The Duke's gloved fingers brushing hers, the sudden, shocking intensity in his slate-grey eyes. It was nothing. The lie was a frantic prayer in her mind, an accident, a moment of proximity. Nothing more. But her body betrayed her. A tremor started in her hands and radiated through her, a humiliating, undeniable response to a touch that had lasted less than a second. She slid down the door until she was sitting on the cold floorboards, wrapping her arms around her knees, trying to hold herself together. Her room was small, tucked away in the quietest wing of the vast manor. It was a space of monastic simplicity, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single bookshelf, and a window that overlooked the bleak, wind-swept moors beyond the estate's walls. This room was her sanctuary, her armor. It was a testament to a life built on control, on pragmatism, on the hard-won understanding that her place in the world was conditional. She was here because she was useful. She would be gone the moment she was not. A duke and a governess. The notion was so ludicrous, so utterly ruinous. It belonged in the very novels she was forbidden to read to the children. Men like Alistair Blackwood did not look at women like her. They looked through them. They were part of the scenery, the furniture, the silent machinery that made their grand lives run smoothly. But he had looked at her, and in that look, she had not felt invisible. She had felt seen, entirely and terrifyingly seen. It was a gaze that had stripped away the grey dress and the title of governess and found the woman beneath, a woman she kept carefully hidden for survival. She held up her hand in the fading light. It was just a hand, pale and ink-stained. But it no longer felt like her own. It felt branded by the memory of his touch, by the impossible searing heat that had passed through the barrier of his glove. She curled her fingers into a tight fist, her nails digging into her palm, welcoming the sharp, grounding pain. Fear, she understood. Desire was a language she could not afford to learn. The next morning, the schoolroom was a haven of familiar order. The scent of chalk dust, beeswax, and dried lavender in the potpourri bowl was a comfort. Sunlight, watery and pale, streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the sprawling map of the world on the wall. Here, Ilara was not just a servant. She was a creator of worlds for two small wounded children. "The Amazon is the largest river in the world," she explained, her finger tracing a blue vein across a continent. It flows through a rainforest so dense that the sunlight barely touches the ground. Amelia, her face a miniature portrait of solemn curiosity, leaned closer. "Are there monsters in it?" "Not monsters," Ilara smiled, the expression feeling almost natural, "but creatures more fantastic than any you could imagine. Caimans with eyes like jewels and butterflies the size of your hand." Thomas, quieter and more watchful than his sister, was sketching in a charcoal pad at the table. He was not drawing butterflies. He was drawing a castle stark and imposing, with a single shadowed figure in the highest window. Since his parents' death, his drawings had been his only true language. Ilara's heart ached for them. She had come to Blackwood Manor for the wages, for the roof over her head. She had not expected to find a piece of her own bruised heart in these two lonely children. They were the reason she had to be so careful. Her position here was her only shield, and theirs. A sharp rap on the door shattered the morning's fragile peace. Ilara's back went rigid. The children looked up, their eyes wide. Visitors to the schoolroom were rare. The Dowager Duchess never came, viewing education as a transaction she had paid for. And the Duke. The Duke had never come before. The door swung open. He filled the doorway, his sheer size diminishing the room. He was dressed not for the country but for London, in a perfectly tailored black coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He looked like a storm cloud, dark and powerful, and he had brought the charged atmosphere of the library with him. "Your Grace," Ilara said, rising to her feet. Her voice was a credit to her control, calm even, betraying none of the chaos inside her. She curtsied, her movements precise. "Miss Vance." His gaze swept the room, taking in the maps, the scattered books, the children's earnest faces, before it finally landed on her. It lingered for a fraction of a second too long, and in that fleeting moment, she felt the memory of the previous night arc between them like lightning. "I came to see the children's progress," he announced, his tone formal, clipped. It was a plausible lie. He stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a soft, definitive click. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick and heavy. He walked over to Thomas's side, looking down at the boy's drawing. "A fortress," the Duke observed, his voice a low rumble. Thomas nodded, not looking up. "No one can get in." "And no one can get out," Alistair added, his words freighted with a weariness that sounded ancient. He looked from the drawing to Ilara, and for a heartbeat she saw the man, not the Duke. A man trapped in his own fortress. He moved on, pacing the room with a predator's contained grace. He stopped before the table where she had been teaching, his eyes falling on the books laid out there. Among them was the copy of Virgil. He did not look at her, but she felt his awareness of her as a physical force. It was in the air in the sudden, suffocating silence. He reached out and placed his hand flat on the cover of the book, his long fingers splayed across the worn leather. It was not a casual gesture. It was a statement, a deliberate, silent acknowledgement of the moment that had passed between them. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. "Look away," she screamed at herself. "Do not meet his eyes." But it was too late. He raised his head, and his gaze captured hers. The children, the maps, the sunlight, it all faded away. There was only the unnerving intensity of his eyes, which held a question he would never dare to ask and an answer she would never dare to give. In that shared look, 1,000 unspeakable things were said. He was as shaken as she was. He was as trapped. The spell was broken by a sound from the hall, the sharp, distinct tapping of a cane, followed by the clear, cutting voice of the Dowager Duchess, speaking to a footman. Instantly, the mask of ducal indifference slammed back into place on Alistair's face. He withdrew his hand from the book, as if it were hot iron. He straightened to his full, imposing height, the brief, raw vulnerability vanishing completely. "See that Thomas practices his penmanship," he said, his voice cold and distant once more. "His letters are an embarrassment." The casual cruelty of it was a slap in the face, meant as much for her as for the boy who now flinched beside her. It was a reminder of his power, of the unbridgeable chasm between them. He was reasserting the boundaries she had momentarily forgotten. Without another glance, he turned and left the schoolroom, leaving behind a silence that was more profound, more resonant than any sound. Ilara stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. She could still feel the phantom weight of his gaze on her, the echo of his presence in the too small room. The children were silent, unsettled by the emotional storm they had just witnessed but could not name. She looked at the copy of Virgil on the table. He had touched it, claimed it, turned it into a symbol of a silent, dangerous secret. She understood now. The fortress was not in Thomas's drawing. It was here, in this house. And she was locked inside with the monster. Or perhaps, she thought with a terrifying tremor of insight, she was locked inside with a fellow prisoner. The Duke's visit left an invisible scar on the schoolroom. A nervous energy hummed in the air for days afterward, unsettling the children, and stretching Ilara's composure to its breaking point. Thomas grew quieter, his charcoal drawings becoming darker, the lines more frantic. Amelia, ever sensitive to the emotional currents of the house, began having nightmares again, her small cries echoing from the nursery in the dead of night. It was Ilara who went to her. Not the night nurse, whose starched uniform and brisk efficiency offered little comfort, but Ilara, in her plain flannel dressing gown, her hair unbound. She would sit on the edge of the small bed, stroking Amelia's hair, her voice a low, soothing murmur until the child's trembling subsided and her breathing evened into the soft rhythm of sleep. During one of these nightly vigils, as she was returning to her own room through the labyrinthine, moonlit corridors, she saw him. A sliver of light spilled from beneath the door of the West Wing gallery, a part of the manor that was kept closed, a mausoleum of dust-sheeted furniture and shrouded portraits. Curiosity, a dangerous and unfamiliar impulse, compelled her forward. The door was ajar. Pushing it open a fraction of an inch, she peered inside. The gallery was a cavern of shadows, but a single candelabra burned on a small table, casting a pool of flickering gold onto the floor. Alistair stood before a massive, uncovered portrait, his back to her. He was in his shirt sleeves, the formal coat and waistcoat discarded, a decanter of brandy on the table beside him. The rigid, ducal posture was gone. In its place was the weary slump of a man carrying an impossible burden. He was speaking, his voice so low it was almost a whisper, lost in the vastness of the room. "I'm trying, Michael. God help me, I am trying. But they are your children. They should have been yours to raise." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The portrait, she now realized, was of a younger man who shared Alistair's height and dark hair, but whose face was captured in a moment of easy, carefree laughter. His eyes, unlike the Duke's stormy grey, were warm and kind. This was Michael Blackwood, the brother whose death had thrust Alistair into a role he was never meant to inherit. Alistair raised his glass in a mock toast to the painting. "You escaped," he murmured, the words raw with a grief so profound it made Ilara's own heart ache in sympathy. "You lucky bastard, you escaped it all." He drank, the movement sharp and bitter. Ilara pulled back, her heart pounding. She felt like a trespasser, a spy who had stumbled upon a secret, sacred ritual of mourning. She fled back to her room, the image of the solitary Duke confessing his soul to a ghost seared into her mind. The man in the schoolroom, the cruel, imperious Duke, had been a performance. The man in the gallery, broken and alone, felt terrifyingly real. The next afternoon, determined to chase the shadows from the children's minds, she took them outside. The autumn air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and wood smoke. She led them not to the formal, manicured lawns, but to a forgotten corner of the estate, a walled garden, overgrown and wild. Years ago it must have been a place of beauty, but now ivy crawled over the crumbling stone walls and weeds choked the flower beds. At its center was a stone sundial, its face obscured by moss. "This was your mother's garden," Ilara told them softly, her gloved hand brushing a curtain of ivy from a stone bench. "I'm told she loved it best when it was a little wild." It was a risk. The children rarely spoke of their parents. Their grief was a locked room, and she had no key. Amelia's eyes, wide and curious, scanned the beautiful decay. "Mother liked flowers. She loved them," Ilara confirmed gently. She said every garden was a story of things growing and changing. As they explored, a fragile sense of peace settled over them. Thomas discovered a line of ants marching purposefully along the sundial's edge, and for the first time in days, his face lit with genuine interest. Amelia gathered a small, poignant bouquet of late-blooming roses and resilient weeds. They were so absorbed that none of them noticed the figure approaching, until his shadow fell over them. Alistair stood at the rusted iron gate, his expression unreadable. He was dressed for riding, in tall leather boots and a heavy tweed coat that made him seem even larger, a force of nature against the backdrop of the untamed garden. His gaze took in the scene, the children, their faces smudged with dirt and for the first time relaxed. And her, standing among the weeds, a stray leaf caught in her hair. Ilara's first instinct was to feel fear, the familiar dread of having overstepped. This was a private place, heavy with memory. "Your Grace," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He walked toward them, his boots crunching on the gravel path. He did not look at her, but at the sundial where his nephew was crouched. "The motto is in Latin," he said, his voice quiet. He ran a gloved finger over the stone, dislodging a patch of moss. The carved letters underneath were faint but legible. "Horas non numero nisi serenas." "I count only the sunny hours," Ilara translated softly, almost to herself. He looked at her then, and the air between them thickened. The world outside the garden walls, the manor, his mother, their duties, ceased to exist. There was only the shared understanding that passed between their eyes. In this place of memory and loss, they were not a duke and a governess. They were two people who understood the weight of the hours that were not sunny. Amelia, emboldened by the strange, gentle atmosphere, tugged on his coat sleeve. "Miss Vance says this was Mother's garden," she said, her small voice full of a child's simple gravity. Alistair looked down at his niece, and for a moment the harsh lines of his face softened. A profound, aching tenderness filled his eyes. He knelt, bringing himself down to her level, an act of surrender that stunned Ilara. "Yes, it was," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She would spend hours here. She said it was the only place the rest of the world couldn't find her." He looked over Amelia's head directly at Ilara, and his meaning was perfectly clear. "Just like you." He saw it then. He saw that she, too, was hiding. That her quiet efficiency and downcast eyes were a walled garden of her own, a place she retreated to where the world could not find her. The recognition was a silent, devastating confession. The moment was shattered by the distant, imperious ringing of a bell from the main house, the Dowager Duchess summoning her son. The spell broke. Alistair's face hardened, the mask of duty snapping back into place. He rose to his feet, once again the imposing Duke of Blackwood. He gave the children a stiff, formal nod, his gaze sweeping past Ilara as if she were a statue. "See that they are back inside for tea, Miss Vance," he commanded, his tone clipped and impersonal. He turned and strode from the garden, leaving a profound silence in his wake. Ilara watched him go, her hand pressed against her chest, where her heart was beating a wild, impossible rhythm. She had seen the ghost he carried, and today, in this forgotten garden, he had seen hers. It was no longer a secret. It was a bond as fragile and as real as a spider's thread, now spun between them in the silent, lonely fortress of Blackwood Manor. The manor felt different after the garden. Ilara moved through the corridors like a woman walking on a frozen lake, testing each step, listening for the crack. 3 days had passed since that rain-soaked afternoon among the foxgloves and forget-me-nots. 3 days since the Duke had looked at her, truly looked, and she had not turned away. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself this as she laid out the children's lessons, as she brushed Amelia's hair in the morning light, as she avoided the library entirely. But her body betrayed her. Her pulse quickened whenever footsteps echoed in the hall. Her hands trembled when arranging flowers, half expecting to see him appear in a doorway, his dark eyes searching. It was dangerous, this hoping. The morning of the 4th day arrived with a letter. Ilara found it slipped beneath her door, a single folded note on heavy cream paper, unsealed. No name, no signature, just 5 words in a bold, slanting hand. "Meet me, the stables, midnight." Her breath caught. She should burn it, should pretend she never saw it, should remember her place, her purpose, the iron laws that separated a duke from a governess, like an ocean from the shore. Instead, she pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes. Midnight came like a thief. The house had settled into its nightly silence. The servants retired, the children asleep, the Dowager Duchess locked away in her chambers with her Bible and her bitterness. Ilara wrapped a dark shawl around her shoulders and slipped through the kitchen door, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. The stables sat at the edge of the estate, shadowed by ancient oaks. A single lantern glowed inside, casting amber light through the slats. She could hear the soft shuffle of horses, the creak of leather, the whisper of hay. And then, him. Alistair stood in the centre aisle, his coat discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He was brushing down a chestnut mare, his movements slow and deliberate, as if the act itself was a meditation. He looked up as she entered, and the brush stilled in his hand. "You came," he said. "Not a question. A confession." "I shouldn't have," Ilara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," he agreed. "You shouldn't." The silence stretched between them, taut, humming, alive. He set the brush down and stepped closer. The scent of him reached her first. Sandalwood, leather, and something darker, more dangerous. Want. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," he said, and the rawness in his voice made her knees weak. "Not since that day in the garden. Not since I saw you with the children. Not since—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "God help me, Ilara, I've tried." She should leave, she should run. She should remember every lesson her mother ever taught her about men like him, men who took what they wanted and left women like her to bear the consequences. But she didn't move. "What do you want from me?" she asked, and her voice cracked on the question. "Everything," he said simply, "and nothing I have the right to ask." He reached for her hand, slowly giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, terrifying. "My mother is arranging a match," he said quietly. "Lady Catherine Ashford, daughter of the Earl of Wessex. Impeccable bloodline, spotless reputation, the perfect duchess." Each word was a stone dropped into water, rippling outward, drowning hope. "Then why am I here?" Ilara whispered. His grip tightened. "Because I don't want perfect. I don't want spotless, I want—" His voice broke. He pulled her closer until the space between them was nothing but breath and firelight. "I want the woman who reads to broken children, who sees ghosts in gardens, who makes me forget, for one damned moment, that I'm supposed to be someone I'm not." Tears pricked her eyes. "You're a duke, Alistair. I'm a governess. This can never—" "I know." The pain in his voice was a living thing. "Believe me, I know." But he didn't let go. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture so achingly tender it shattered something inside her. His mouth brushed her knuckles, once, twice, and she felt the world tilt. "One night," he murmured against her skin. "Give me one night where I'm not the Duke of Blackwood, where I'm just a man, just Alistair." "And tomorrow?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Tomorrow I'll let you go." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But she nodded anyway. They didn't speak after that. He led her to an empty stall at the back of the stable, freshly lined with clean hay and wool blankets. The lantern light flickered, painting their shadows on the wooden walls, two figures, intertwined, impossible. They sat together in the straw, shoulders touching, the warmth of him seeping through her shawl. Outside, an owl called. The mare nickered softly. The night held its breath. "Tell me something true," Alistair said quietly. Ilara turned to look at him. In the dim light he looked younger, less duke, more man, vulnerable. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of this, of you, of what happens when the sun comes up." "So am I," he said. And then, slowly, so slowly, he reached up and traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. The touch was reverent, as if she were made of glass, as if he were memorizing her. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he whispered. She closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. Letting herself for one reckless moment believe them. When his lips found hers, it was not urgent, not desperate. It was soft, searching. A question she answered with her whole heart. The kiss tasted like rain and ruin and everything she had ever been warned against. And she didn't care. Hours later, as dawn crept over the estate in shades of rose and gold, Ilara slipped back to her room. Her lips were swollen, her heart was in pieces. Her hands still smelled of him. She knew with a cold and certain clarity that nothing would ever be the same. And when she reached her door, she found another note waiting. This one was not in Alistair's hand. The script was sharp, elegant, unmistakable. "My office, 9 o'clock. We need to discuss your future here." It was signed with a single initial, D. The Dowager Duchess knew. The Dowager Duchess's office was a shrine to control. Everything in it spoke of order, lineage, and the immovable weight of tradition. Dark mahogany paneling, portraits of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors staring down from gilded frames. A desk that had witnessed centuries of decisions, each one carved into the family tree like a commandment. Ilara stood in the center of the room, hands clasped in front of her, spine straight. She had dressed carefully, her plainest grey dress, her hair pinned severely back, every trace of last night scrubbed away, but she could still feel Alistair's lips on hers. Could still smell the hay and sandalwood clinging to her skin like a ghost. The dowager sat behind the desk, a figure carved from ice and duty. She did not look up from the letter she was reading, did not acknowledge Ilara's presence for a full, excruciating minute. The silence was a weapon. Finally, she set the letter down with deliberate precision and folded her hands atop it. When her eyes lifted, they were the same dark shade as Alistair's, but where his held warmth, hers were winter itself. "Miss Vance," she said. Her voice was cultured, clipped, merciless. "Do you know why you are here?" Ilara's throat was dry. "No, Your Grace." A lie. They both knew it. The dowager's lips thinned into something that might have been a smile on a kinder woman. "Then allow me to illuminate you." She opened a drawer and withdrew a folded handkerchief, delicate, embroidered with tiny blue forget-me-nots. Ilara's heart stopped. She had lost it. "In the garden. 3 days ago. One of the maids found this," the dowager said softly. "In the old rose garden, the same garden my son was seen entering, alone, in the rain." She paused, letting the words land like blows. "The same garden he emerged from an hour later, soaked, changed." Ilara forced herself to breathe, to keep her face neutral. "The children sometimes play there. I must have—" "Do not insult my intelligence, Miss Vance." The words cracked like a whip. The dowager stood, moving with the slow grace of a predator. She circled the desk, her silk skirts whispering against the floor. When she stopped, she was close enough that Ilara could smell her perfume, lavender and something bitter. Wormwood, perhaps. "I have watched women like you my entire life," she said quietly. "Clever, pretty, desperate. Women who see a title and mistake loneliness for opportunity." Her gaze raked over Ilara like broken glass. "You are not the first governess to set her sights on a man above her station, but you will be the last to make that mistake in my house." "I have done nothing." "You exist," the dowager interrupted. "That is enough." The cruelty in those 3 words stole Ilara's breath. "My son," the dowager continued, "is in a fragile state. Grief makes men foolish. It makes them seek comfort in inappropriate places." Her eyes narrowed. "But grief passes. Duty does not. Alistair will marry Lady Catherine Ashford by summer's end. He will produce an heir. He will honor the name he carries." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "And you, Miss Vance, will disappear." Ilara's hands trembled, but she did not lower her gaze. "I have done my work honorably," she said, and was surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "The children are thriving. I have overstepped no boundaries." "Haven't you?" The dowager reached out and with chilling gentleness tucked a loose strand of hair behind Ilara's ear. The gesture was almost maternal and utterly terrifying. "A boundary, my dear, is not only crossed by action, it is crossed by thought, by want, by the way a woman looks at a man who will never, ever be hers." She withdrew her hand, and the warmth vanished with it. "I saw you. At dinner last week. The way you watched him when you thought no one noticed." Ilara's face burned. "I am offering you a choice," the dowager said, returning to her desk. She withdrew an envelope, thick, sealed with wax. "Inside is a bank draft for £500, enough to start a new life, a letter of reference, glowing and false, and a ticket to London on tomorrow's morning coach." She slid it across the desk. "Take it. Leave quietly. Spare yourself the humiliation of being dismissed in disgrace." Ilara stared at the envelope. £500. More money than she had ever seen. Enough to change everything. "And if I refuse?" she asked. The dowager smiled. "A cold, terrible thing. Then I will ensure no family in England ever hires you again. I will spread word that you were dismissed for theft, for moral impropriety, for corrupting the children in your care." She tilted her head. "Do you know what happens to governesses with ruined reputations, Miss Vance? They disappear, into workhouses, into the shadows, unmarked graves." The room tilted. Ilara gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Her mind raced. She thought of Amelia's small hand in hers, of Thomas finally smiling, of Alistair's voice in the darkness. "Give me one night." "I need time," she whispered. "You have until sunrise," the Dowager said. "After that, the choice will be made for you." Ilara fled. She didn't remember leaving the office, didn't remember climbing the stairs to her room. She collapsed onto her narrow bed, gasping for air. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. £500. Or ruin. She pressed her face into her pillow and screamed, silent, furious, broken. A knock at the door froze her. "Ilara?" "Alistair." She sat up, swiping at her eyes. "You can't be here." The door opened anyway. He stepped inside, closing it softly behind him. In the daylight he looked haggard, shadows beneath his eyes, his cravat loosened, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. "My mother summoned you," he said. Not a question. Ilara turned away. "You need to leave." "Tell me what she said." "It doesn't matter." "Ilara, she knows." The words tore out of her. "She knows, and she's giving me money to disappear, and if I don't, she'll destroy me. So yes, Alistair, it matters. It matters because I was a fool to think—" Her voice cracked. "To think this could ever be anything but a mistake." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her to her feet. His hands framed her face, forcing her to look at him. "You are not a mistake," he said fiercely. "Then what am I?" she demanded, tears spilling over. "Your secret, your rebellion, the woman you'll remember fondly when you're married to Lady Catherine, and I'm—" She choked on a sob. "God, what was I thinking? That I love you." The world stopped. Ilara stared at him. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. "What?" "I love you," Alistair repeated, his voice breaking. "I have tried not to. I have told myself it's impossible, that it's madness, that I'm betraying everything I was raised to be. But I love you, Ilara, and I will not let her take you from me." "You don't have a choice," she whispered. "There is always a choice." He kissed her then, desperate, consuming, as if he could brand the truth of his words into her skin, and for one wild, reckless moment, she let herself believe him. When they finally broke apart, both of them trembling, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Run away with me," he whispered. Ilara's eyes widened. "What?" "Tonight. We'll leave before dawn. I have money, connections. We can go to the continent, Paris, Vienna, anywhere she can't reach us. You're talking about abandoning your title. Your family, everything. I'm talking about choosing you." The sincerity in his eyes shattered her. "And the children?" she asked quietly. "Amelia and Thomas? Who will protect them from her?" Alistair flinched as if she'd struck him. The silence that followed was answer enough. Ilara stepped back, her decision crystallizing like ice in her chest. "I'll take the money," she said. "Ilara, I'll leave in the morning. You'll marry Lady Catherine. You'll be the duke your mother wants you to be." Her voice was steady now, even as her heart splintered. "And you'll take care of those children because they need you more than I do." "That's not true." "It is." She cupped his face, memorizing every line, every shadow. "And you know it." She kissed him one last time, soft, aching, final. Then she turned away. "Go," she whispered. "Please." And after a long, terrible moment, he did. That night, Ilara sat by her window, the envelope unopened on her lap. Outside, the moon rose over Blackwood Manor, cold and indifferent. And in the distance she heard the sound of a horse galloping into the darkness. Someone was leaving. But it wasn't her. Dawn came like a judgment. Ilara had not slept. She had sat by the window through the endless night, watching the stars fade, listening to the manor settle and creak around her. The envelope lay on her dresser, still unopened. The horse's hoofbeats had faded hours ago, swallowed by distance and darkness. And now the sun was rising. She moved through her morning routine like a ghost, washing her face in cold water, pinning her hair, buttoning her grey dress with numb fingers. In the mirror, her reflection looked hollowed out. A woman made of porcelain and grief. The choice had been made. She would take the dowager's money, she would leave. She would let Alistair become the duke he was meant to be, and she would disappear into the anonymity of London, carrying the memory of him like a scar beneath her ribs. It was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. So why did it feel like dying? A knock shattered the silence. "Miss Vance." It was Mrs. Holloway, the head housekeeper. Her voice was tight, strained. "You're wanted downstairs. Immediately." Ilara's heart stumbled. By whom? Everyone. The drawing room was chaos. Servants clustered in corners, whispering behind their hands. The dowager stood by the fireplace, her face a mask of fury barely contained. And in the center of it all stood a man Ilara had never seen before, tall, silver-haired, dressed in the somber black of a solicitor. But Alistair was nowhere. "Where is the Duke?" Ilara asked, her voice barely audible. The dowager's gaze cut to her like a blade. "That," she said icily, "is the question of the hour." The solicitor stepped forward, his expression grave. "Miss Vance, I presume. My name is Mr. Thaddeus Grimm, senior partner of Grimm & Hartley. I represent the Duke of Blackwood's estate." He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "I'm afraid there's been an incident." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. "What kind of incident?" Ilara whispered. "His Grace left the manor sometime after midnight," Mr. Grimm said carefully. "Alone, on horseback. He left behind a letter." He glanced at the dowager, who looked as if she'd been carved from stone. "A letter relinquishing his claim to the dukedom." The room erupted. Servants gasped. The dowager swayed, gripping the mantel for support. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible," she breathed. "He wouldn't—" "He did." The dowager's voice was poison and ice. "Because of you." Every eye in the room turned to Ilara. "He wrote, Mr. Grimm continued, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "I cannot be the man my family requires while living a lie. I choose truth over title. I choose love over legacy." He looked up, his gaze settling on Ilara with something like pity. "He renounced everything, Miss Vance. For you." The weight of those words crushed the air from her lungs. "No," she whispered. "No, he couldn't have. The children, the dowager hissed, "are precisely why this is unforgivable." She advanced on Ilara like a storm gathering strength. "He has abandoned his duty, his name, his blood. And for what? A governess." She spat the word like a curse. "You have destroyed this family. I didn't ask him to. You didn't have to." The dowager's voice cracked, raw with rage and something deeper. Grief. "You existed. That was enough." Ilara's vision blurred. Her hands shook. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear the world apart, but all she could do was stand there, drowning. "Where did he go?" she asked hoarsely. Mr. Grimm hesitated. The letter did not say, but there was a postscript. He unfolded the paper again, his voice softening. "Tell Ilara I waited, and when she's ready, I will still be waiting." The dowager made a sound like a wounded animal. "Get out," she said to Ilara. "Get out of my house, now." Ilara packed in a daze. Her hands moved automatically, folding her spare dress, gathering her few books, tucking the unopened envelope into her bag. Around her the manor pulsed with scandal. Servants whispered in corners. Doors slammed. Someone was weeping. Amelia, perhaps, or one of the maids who'd grown fond of the Duke. Ilara felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. She felt everything, all at once, a storm so vast it left her numb. She was lacing her boots when the door burst open. Amelia stood in the doorway, her small face blotchy with tears. "You're leaving?" she demanded. "Just like that? Just like everyone else?" Ilara's heart cracked. "Amelia, Uncle Alistair is gone, and now you're going too." The girl's voice trembled. "Why does everyone leave us?" Ilara knelt, pulling the child into her arms. Amelia collapsed against her, sobbing into her shoulder with the wild, inconsolable grief of someone who had lost too much too young. "I'm so sorry," Ilara whispered, tears streaming down her own face. "I never wanted—" "Then stay," Amelia begged. "Please, stay." And God, how Ilara wanted to. Wanted to hold this broken child and promise her the world would be kind. Wanted to believe love could conquer duty, that choice could rewrite destiny. But the dowager's shadow loomed too large. "I can't," Ilara said, her voice breaking. "But listen to me, Amelia." She pulled back, framing the girl's tear-streaked face in her hands. "You are strong. You are brave. And you are loved. Do you hear me? You are loved." Amelia clung to her, shaking. And then Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway, her face hard but her eyes soft. "Come, Lady Amelia, it's time." The child was gently pried away, still reaching for Ilara as she was led down the hall. Her cries echoed through the manor, each one a knife to Ilara's chest. When the silence returned, it was unbearable. The coach departed at noon. Ilara sat alone in the cramped compartment, her bag clutched in her lap, the envelope still unopened. The manor grew smaller in the window, its grey stone towers fading into the mist. She thought of Alistair, wondered where he had gone, if he was safe, if he regretted it, if he would ever forgive her for not running with him. The countryside blurred past, rolling hills, stone fences, villages that looked like toys. Each mile took her farther from the life she'd briefly touched, the love she'd never dared claim. She opened the envelope. Inside, as promised, was the bank draft. £500, a king's ransom for a woman like her. But there was something else. A second letter folded small, written in Alistair's hand. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. "Ilara, if you are reading this, I have failed. I waited in the garden until dawn, hoping you would come, hoping you would choose me the way I chose you, but you didn't. I don't blame you. You are braver than I am. You know that some loves are too dangerous to keep, that some choices destroy more than they save. I am going to my estate in Scotland, a small, forgotten place my mother doesn't know exists. I will live there quietly, alone, and I will wait. If you change your mind, if you decide that love is worth the ruin, come find me. The address is enclosed. If you don't, I will understand, but know this. You were the only real thing in my life, the only choice I ever made for myself, and I will love you until the day I die. Yours, A." Ilara pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. The coach rattled on, and in her bag, hidden beneath her spare stockings, was a scrap of paper with an address scrawled in Alistair's hand. Ravencroft Cottage, Loch Lomond, Scotland. The choice, it seemed, was not yet over. London swallowed her whole. Ilara arrived at dusk, when the city was at its ugliest, smoke-choked grey, the Thames stinking of refuse and rot. The coaching inn spat her out onto cobblestones slick with rain and something darker. Around her, the city roared. Vendors hawking meat pies, beggars clutching at her skirts, carriages clattering past in a relentless, indifferent parade. She had never felt more alone. She found lodgings in Bloomsbury, a narrow room on the third floor of a boarding house that smelled of boiled cabbage and mildew. The landlady, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Pettigrew, took Ilara's first month's rent without a smile and handed her a tarnished key. "No gentlemen callers," she said flatly. "No noise after 10. Breakfast is at 7. Miss it, and you go hungry." Ilara nodded, too exhausted to speak. The room was barely large enough for a bed and a washstand. A single window overlooked a soot-stained courtyard where laundry hung like surrender flags. She set her bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the narrow mattress and stared at the peeling wallpaper. This was freedom. This was the life she had chosen. It felt like a grave. The first week passed in a fog. Ilara walked the city, searching for work. She answered advertisements for governesses, companions, seamstresses, anything respectable. But the responses were always the same. "Do you have references?" She would produce the dowager's glowing letter, perfectly forged, perfectly false. "And your last position?" "The Duke of Blackwood's estate," she would say, keeping her voice steady. And then always the shift, the narrowing of eyes, the uncomfortable pause. "We'll let you know." They never did, because by then the whispers had begun. The scandal had travelled faster than she had. The Duke who renounced his title for a governess, the woman who destroyed a family, the ruin wrapped in grey wool and desperation. No one would hire her. By the second week, the £500 felt like a life raft in a storm. Essential, finite, terrifying. She rationed every shilling, eating stale bread and weak tea, mending her stockings until they were more darn than fabric. At night, she lay awake in the darkness, listening to the city's endless noise and thought of Alistair. She wondered if he was warm, if he was safe, if he thought of her, if he regretted it. On the 15th day she found work, not as a governess, not as a companion, but as a seamstress in a sweatshop in Whitechapel, where women hunched over sewing machines in rooms with no windows, stitching garments for pennies a day. The forewoman looked Ilara up and down with eyes that had seen every kind of desperation. "You got good hands?" she asked. "Yes." "You don't complain?" "No." "Then you start tomorrow, 6 in the morning. Don't be late." Ilara nodded, swallowing the humiliation like glass. This was survival. This was the price of choosing duty over love. The work was brutal. 12 hours a day bent over a machine that clattered and screamed, stitching seams until her fingers bled. The other women barely spoke, too tired, too broken, too afraid of losing the work that kept them from the streets. Ilara learned their rhythm, learned to keep her head down, her hands moving, her thoughts locked away in a place where they couldn't hurt her. But at night, back in her cramped room, the walls closed in. She would sit by the window, Alistair's letter unfolded on her lap, reading it until the words blurred. "I will wait. Come find me. I will love you until the day I die." And every night she told herself the same lie. "Tomorrow, I'll forget him." It was a Sunday when everything changed. Sundays the sweatshop was closed. Ilara spent the morning at a street market, counting coins, buying a single apple and a crust of bread. The city was different on Sundays, quieter, almost gentle, the church bells ringing over rooftops like a reminder that mercy still existed somewhere. She was walking through Covent Garden when she heard it, a child's laughter, sharp, bright, familiar. Her heart stopped. She turned, scanning the crowd, and there, impossible, devastating, was Amelia. The girl was standing outside a toy shop, holding Thomas's hand, staring wide-eyed at a painted doll in the window. Behind them stood a stern woman in black, a new governess, no doubt, hired to replace Ilara. For a moment, Ilara couldn't breathe. She should walk away, should let the past stay buried, should protect the fragile, miserable peace she had built. But her feet moved without permission. "Amelia," she whispered. The girl turned and her face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Miss Vance!" She tore free from the governess's grip and flung herself at Ilara, wrapping thin arms around her waist. "You're here! You're really here!" Ilara dropped to her knees, pulling the child close, tears streaming down her face. "Amelia, oh, sweetheart." "We've been looking everywhere for you," Amelia said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Grandmother wouldn't tell us where you went, but I knew you'd be in London. I knew it." The new governess approached, frowning. "Lady Amelia, you mustn't speak to strangers." "She's not a stranger," Amelia shouted. "She's ours." Ilara's heart shattered. She looked up at the governess, a mousy woman with tired eyes. "I apologize. I used to work for the family." The woman's expression softened with recognition and pity. "You're her, the one who—" She stopped, glancing at the children. "I see. Is he—" Ilara couldn't finish the question, but Amelia answered anyway. "Uncle Alistair is in Scotland," she said quietly. "He writes to us. Every week and every letter he asks if we've seen you." Her small hand gripped Ilara's. "Why didn't you go with him?" Ilara closed her eyes. "Because I thought it was the right thing to do." Was it? The question was so simple, so devastating. Ilara looked at this child, brave, broken, still clinging to hope despite everything the world had taken from her, and she realized with sudden, terrible clarity that she had been wrong. Not about leaving Blackwood Manor, but about what came after. She had thought choosing duty over love was noble, selfless, but it wasn't. It was fear. Fear of wanting too much, fear of being hurt, fear of believing she deserved something more than survival. And in that fear she had abandoned the one person who had seen her, truly seen her, and loved her anyway. "No," Ilara whispered. "It wasn't." She returned to her boarding house with a plan crystallizing in her chest, like ice turning to steel. The £500 could buy her survival in London, 6 months, maybe a year if she was careful, or it could buy her a chance at something else. She pulled out Alistair's letter, read the address one more time: Ravenscroft Cottage, Loch Lomond, Scotland. Then she opened her bag, counted out enough money for a train ticket north, and began to pack. Mrs. Pettigrew stood in the doorway, watching. "Leaving already?" "Yes." "Got a gentleman waiting, do you?" Ilara looked up, and for the first time in weeks she smiled. "Yes," she said, "I do." The train to Scotland departed at dawn. Ilara boarded with nothing but her bag, her courage, and a heart that felt, for the first time since leaving Blackwood, like it might survive. The countryside blurred past, green hills, stone walls, rivers that glittered like silver. With every mile, the city fell away. With every mile, she felt lighter. She didn't know what waited for her in Scotland. Didn't know if Alistair would still want her after she'd walked away. Didn't know if love could survive the weight of everything they'd lost. But she was done running. Done choosing fear over hope. Done pretending she could live without him. The train raced north, carrying her toward an uncertain future, and for the first time in her life, Ilara wasn't afraid. Scotland was a different world. The train had carried Ilara north through landscapes that grew wilder with each passing hour, rolling green hills giving way to craggy mountains, soft rain turning to mist that clung to the lochs like breath. By the time she reached the village of Luss, the air tasted of heather and peat smoke, and the sky was a bruised purple streaked with gold. She hired a cart from a farmer who eyed her worn dress and single bag with quiet curiosity, but asked no questions. The road to Ravenscroft wound through forests of ancient pine and birch, past waterfalls that tumbled down black rock, through glens where deer watched from the shadows with liquid eyes. And then, as the sun dipped low, she saw it. Ravenscroft Cottage sat at the edge of Loch Lomond, like a secret the land had been keeping. It was small, stone walls covered in creeping ivy, a slate roof, smoke curling from a single chimney. Wildflowers rioted in the overgrown garden. The loch stretched beyond it, black and still as a mirror, reflecting the first stars. It was nothing like Blackwood Manor. It was perfect. The cart stopped at the gate. The farmer nodded toward the cottage. "That'll be the place, miss." Ilara climbed down, her legs trembling. She paid him with shaking hands, and he tipped his cap and drove away, leaving her alone in the gathering dusk. For a long moment, she stood frozen. What if he wasn't there? What if he'd left? What if he'd found someone else, someone braver, someone who hadn't walked away? What if he didn't want her anymore? The front door opened, and there he was. Alistair stood in the doorway, backlit by firelight, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. He looked different, thinner. His hair was longer, unstyled, falling across his forehead. He wore no coat, no cravat, just a simple linen shirt rolled to the elbows and dark trousers. His feet were bare. He looked like a man who had shed every layer of artifice and found himself beneath. He looked like home. "Ilara," he breathed, and she ran. She dropped her bag and ran to him, closing the distance between them in a few desperate strides. He caught her, his arms locking around her waist, lifting her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. She buried her face in his neck, breathing him in, sandalwood and wood smoke and salt, exactly as she remembered. "You came," he whispered against her hair, his voice breaking. "God, I didn't think—" "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I was afraid, and I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong, Alistair. I was so wrong." "Shh." He set her down gently, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You're here now. That's all that matters." His eyes searched hers, dark, intense, brimming with something too big for words. And then he kissed her. It was nothing like their stolen moments in the stable. This was not tentative or forbidden. This was a man claiming the woman he loved, pouring weeks of loneliness and longing into a single, searing kiss. Ilara kissed him back with everything she had. All the fear, the regret, the desperate, aching hope that had carried her across England. When they finally broke apart, both of them gasping, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Don't leave me again," he whispered. "Never," she promised. Inside, the cottage was humble but warm. A single main room with a stone fireplace, a worn sofa, a table scarred with use, shelves lined with books, a narrow staircase leading to what must be a bedroom above. Everything was simple, clean, touched with the quiet peace of a man learning to live with less. Alistair led her to the fire, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and pressed a cup of tea into her hands. She drank gratefully, the warmth spreading through her frozen limbs. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "Since the day I left Blackwood." He sat beside her, his leg pressed against hers, as if he couldn't bear even an inch of distance. "I bought this place years ago. A whim, maybe. A fantasy. Somewhere I could escape to if the weight of the title ever became too much." He smiled bitterly. "I never imagined I'd actually do it. Do you regret it?" He looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Not for a single second. "But the children, I write to them every week," he said quietly. "Thomas sends me drawings, Amelia sends me lectures about responsibility." A faint smile touched his lips. "They're angry with me. They have every right to be. But they're safe, and in time perhaps they'll understand." Ilara set down her cup and took his hand. "I saw them. In London. Amelia told me you were waiting." His grip tightened. "I would have waited forever." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. "What happens now?" Ilara asked softly. Alistair turned to face her fully, his expression grave. "I need you to understand what you're choosing. I have money. Enough to live comfortably, but not lavishly. I have this cottage and a small income from investments my mother doesn't control. But I have no title, no estate, no legacy to offer you. I don't want a legacy. You'll be ostracized," he continued, his voice steady but pained. "Society will call you a mistress, a homewrecker, worse. We can marry, I'm legally free to do so. But it won't change how the world sees you, sees us." "I don't care. Ilara, I don't care," she repeated fiercely. She rose to her knees, straddling his lap, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Do you think I came all this way for a title? For acceptance? I came for you. The man who read to broken children, who saw me when I was invisible, who chose love when the world demanded duty." Her voice softened, trembling with emotion. "You asked me to run away with you, and I said no because I was terrified. Terrified of wanting too much, of losing everything, of being hurt." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "But living without you? That's the only thing I'm afraid of now." Alistair's composure crumbled. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She held him, this man who had given up everything, and felt her own tears fall. "Marry me," he whispered hoarsely. "Not because it's proper, not because society demands it, but because I love you. Because I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life and see your face. Because you are the only thing in this world that makes sense." Ilara pulled back just enough to see him. His face was wet, raw, beautiful. "Yes," she said simply, and she kissed him again. They were married 3 days later. A small ceremony in the village kirk, witnessed by the local minister and a farmer's wife who wept into her handkerchief. Ilara wore a simple dress she'd bought in the village. Pale blue, modest, nothing like the gowns she'd once laundered for ladies at Blackwood. She had never felt more beautiful. Alistair wore no signet ring, no ducal crest, just a plain gold band he slipped onto her finger with trembling hands. "I, Alistair, take you, Ilara, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. And when the minister pronounced them man and wife, and Alistair kissed her in the small stone church with wildflowers on the altar, Ilara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. That night, in the cottage by the loch, they lay tangled together beneath quilts, the fire burning low. Alistair traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch reverent. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. Ilara smiled. "That I was a fool to ever doubt this." "You were afraid. That's not the same as foolish." She turned to face him, her hand resting over his heart. "Do you think they'll ever forgive us? Your mother, the children, society?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know this. I would rather be condemned with you than crowned without you." She kissed him softly. "Then we'll face it together." "Together," he echoed. Outside, the loch shimmered under moonlight. The wind sang through the heather. And for the first time in both their lives, the future felt like a promise instead of a prison. But in the morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Alistair, sealed with wax he recognized instantly. The Blackwood crest. His mother had found him, and what she demanded would shatter everything. The letter sat on the table like a viper coiled to strike. Ilara watched Alistair's face as he read it, watched the color drain from his skin, watched his jaw clench, watched his fingers grip the paper until it crumpled at the edges. The morning light streaming through the cottage windows seemed suddenly cold. "What does she want?" Ilara asked, her voice steady despite the dread pooling in her stomach. Alistair didn't answer immediately. He set the letter down with careful precision, as if it might explode. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were dark with something that looked like grief. "Thomas is ill," he said quietly. The world tilted. "How ill?" "Scarlet fever." His voice cracked on the words. "He's been sick for a week. The doctors say it's serious." Ilara's hand flew to her mouth. She thought of the boy, quiet, watchful Thomas, with his solemn eyes and his drawings of birds. The child who had lost his parents and learned too young that the world was cruel. "He's asking for me," Alistair continued, his voice hollow. "For us." Amelia wrote a note. "It's enclosed." He handed Ilara a second piece of paper, this one in a child's uneven scrawl, tear-stained and desperate. "Uncle Alistair, please come home. Tommy is very sick and he keeps asking for you and Miss Vance. He says he dreamed you were both here, and when he woke up you were gone and he cried. Grandmother says you won't come, but I told her you would, because you love us. Please prove me right. Please don't let him die thinking you forgot about him. Your niece, Amelia." Ilara's vision blurred. She read the letter again, each word a knife to her chest. "We have to go," she whispered. "I know." "Alistair, I know." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his hands clenched into fists. "But you need to understand what going back means. My mother didn't send this letter out of kindness. She sent it because she knows it's the one thing that could force me to return." "You think it's a trap?" "I think it's leverage." He turned to face her, his expression torn. "Thomas is sick, that much is true. The doctors wouldn't lie. But my mother will use it. She'll demand a price for letting me see him." "What kind of price?" His silence was answer enough. They left within the hour. There was no time to pack properly, no time to second-guess. Alistair hired a coach in the village, and they raced south through Scotland, the landscape blurring into a smear of grey and green. Ilara sat beside him, her hand clasped in his, feeling the tension radiating from his body like heat from a forge. He hadn't spoken since they'd left Ravencroft, hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. He just stared out the window, his jaw set, his mind clearly miles ahead. "Whatever she asks," Ilara said quietly, breaking the silence. "We'll face it together." He looked at her, and for a moment his mask cracked. "I won't let her hurt you again. I'm not afraid of her." "You should be." His voice was grim. "My mother doesn't fight fair. She fights to win." Ilara tightened her grip on his hand. "Then so do we." They reached Blackwood Manor 3 days later. The estate loomed against the grey sky, exactly as Ilara remembered. Imposing, cold, a monument to legacy and loss. The sight of it made her stomach twist. She had sworn she would never return to this place, but love, it seemed, had other plans. The dowager was waiting for them in the drawing room. She sat in a high-backed chair like a queen on a throne, dressed in black silk, her spine straight, her hands folded. She looked older than Ilara remembered, the lines around her mouth deeper, the shadows beneath her eyes darker. But her gaze was still sharp as glass. "Alistair," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You came." "Where is he?" Alistair demanded, bypassing all pretense. "Upstairs in the nursery. The doctor is with him now." She paused, her eyes flicking to Ilara with thinly veiled contempt. "I see you brought her." "Her name is Ilara," Alistair said coldly. "And she is my wife." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. The dowager's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Shock, perhaps, or fury barely restrained. "Your wife," she repeated, her voice like frost cracking. "How quaint." "We're married," Alistair said flatly. "Legally, before God and witnesses. There's nothing you can do about it." "No," the dowager agreed, "but there is something you can do for me." There it was. The trap. "What do you want?" Alistair asked. The dowager rose, moving to the window with slow, deliberate grace. "Thomas is dying, Alistair. The doctors give him days, perhaps a week if he's strong. He's been asking for you. For both of you." She turned, her gaze piercing. "I will allow you to see him, to say goodbye, but there is a condition." "Name it." "When Thomas dies," she said quietly, "you will return to Blackwood. You will resume your title. You will fulfill your duty to this family." Alistair's face went white. "You're asking me to abandon my wife. I'm asking you to be a duke." Her voice hardened. "This family has sacrificed everything for its name. Your brother died serving that name. Your father. Generations before them, and you ran away the moment it became inconvenient." "I ran away," Alistair said, his voice shaking with rage, "because you demanded I live a lie. And now I'm demanding you live a legacy." The dowager stepped closer, her eyes cold and merciless. "You want to see Thomas? Fine. Stay as long as he needs you. Hold his hand. Comfort him. But when he's gone, you will send your wife away. You will marry Lady Catherine. You will produce an heir. And you will never speak of this shameful episode again." "No." The word rang out like a gunshot. Alistair stood, his fists clenched, his entire body trembling. "I will see my nephew. I will stay with him for as long as he needs. But I will not abandon the woman I love. Not for you. Not for this house. Not for a legacy built on suffering." The dowager's mask finally cracked. "Then he will die without you," she hissed. "What?" "If you will not agree to my terms, you will not see him. I will have the servants bar the door. I will tell him you chose her over him, and when he takes his last breath calling for an uncle who never came, that will be on your conscience." Ilara felt the air leave the room. Alistair looked as if he'd been struck. "You wouldn't." "Wouldn't I?" The dowager's smile was cruel. "I have already lost one son to duty. I have lost another to selfishness. I will not lose this family's future because you decided love was more important than blood. He's a child. He's a Blackwood." Her voice cracked like a whip. "And he deserves better than an uncle who values his own happiness over his family's survival." Alistair swayed as if the ground had shifted beneath him. And Ilara, watching this woman wield grief like a weapon, felt something inside her snap. "Let me see him," she said. Every head turned. "Ilara," Alistair began. "Let me see Thomas," Ilara repeated, stepping forward. "Alone." The dowager's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because he asked for me." Ilara lifted her chin, meeting the older woman's gaze without flinching. "Because I love him. And because, unlike you, I don't use dying children as bargaining chips." The dowager's face went scarlet. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the dowager nodded. 5 minutes, she said coldly. Not a second more. The nursery was dim, the curtains drawn against the afternoon light. Thomas lay in a small bed, dwarfed by quilts, his face pale and slick with fever. A doctor hovered nearby, checking his pulse. Amelia sat in a chair beside the bed, her eyes red-rimmed, her small hand clutching her brother's. When Ilara entered, Amelia looked up and burst into tears. "You came," she sobbed. "You really came." Ilara crossed to her, kneeling, pulling the girl into her arms. "Of course I came. Is Uncle Alistair here too?" "He's downstairs." "Why isn't he up here?" Amelia's voice rose, desperate. "Tommy needs him. He needs both of you." Ilara looked at the boy in the bed, his breathing shallow, his small chest rising and falling with effort, and she felt her heart break. "He'll be here soon," she promised. "I swear it." She moved to the bedside, taking Thomas's other hand. His skin was burning. "Tommy," she whispered, "it's Miss Vance. Can you hear me?" The boy's eyes fluttered open, glassy, unfocused. "Miss Vance, I'm here, sweetheart, I'm right here." A weak smile touched his lips. "You came back." "I did." "Uncle Alistair? He's coming. Promise." Ilara's throat closed. She looked at this child, this innocent, beautiful child, and made a choice. "I promise," she said. And she meant it. Ilara found Alistair in the library. He stood by the same bay window where she had first seen him, where this entire impossible story had begun. He was gripping the windowsill so hard his knuckles had gone white, his shoulders rigid, his breathing ragged. "Alistair." He didn't turn. "How is he?" "Weak, feverish, asking for you." She crossed the room, her footsteps soft on the Turkish carpet. "I told him you'd come. You shouldn't have promised that." "Why not?" She reached him, placed a hand on his arm. "Because you're planning to let that woman use a dying child to control you." He flinched as if she'd struck him. "You don't understand? Then help me understand." She moved in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Explain to me how the man who renounced a dukedom for love is now considering abandoning that same love because his mother demands it. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple." Her voice shook with barely controlled fury. "Thomas is upstairs, burning with fever, asking for the uncle who promised to protect him. And you're down here paralyzed by fear of a woman who has controlled you your entire life. She'll destroy you." The words burst from him like a dam breaking. "Don't you see? If I defy her, she'll ruin you. She'll spread rumors that will follow you everywhere. She'll make sure you can never work, never have peace, never—" "I don't care." The simplicity of it stopped him cold. Ilara took his face in her hands, gentle but firm. "Do you remember what you said to me in the garden? That you wanted to be just Alistair, not the Duke, not the legacy, just a man?" "Yes." "Then be that man now." Her voice softened. "Not for me. Not for your mother. For Thomas. For that little boy who has lost everything except the belief that his uncle loves him more than duty." Alistair's eyes closed, and a single tear traced down his cheek. "What if I can't?" he whispered. "What if I go up there and what if I watch him die and there was nothing I could have done?" "Then you'll grieve. We both will. But you'll grieve knowing you chose love when it mattered most." She pressed her forehead to his. "And Thomas will die knowing he was worth more than a legacy." For a long moment they stood like that, two people holding each other against the weight of an impossible world. Then Alistair pulled back, and when he opened his eyes, something had changed. The fear was still there, but beneath it, steel. "I need to speak with my mother," he said quietly. "Alistair, trust me." The dowager was in her private study, a glass of sherry in her hand, her expression carefully neutral. Alistair entered without knocking. Ilara followed, standing just inside the doorway, a silent witness. "Have you come to accept my terms?" the dowager asked. "No." Alistair's voice was calm, controlled. "I've come to give you mine." Her eyebrow arched. "You are in no position to negotiate." "Aren't I?" He moved closer, and for the first time in his life, he looked at his mother without deference, without guilt. "You're right. Thomas is dying, and that is a tragedy that will haunt this family for generations. But what will haunt it more is the knowledge that we let him die alone, because we were too busy protecting a legacy built on suffering. How dare you? I'm not finished. His voice sharpened. You want me to return to Blackwood? To play Duke? To marry some woman I don't love and produce heirs like breeding stock? You want me to erase Elara from my life as if she never existed, as if love is something shameful that needs to be hidden? Love is a luxury, the Dowager hissed. Duty is survival. Then perhaps this family doesn't deserve to survive. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. The Dowager's face went pale. You don't mean that. Don't I? Alistair's gaze was unwavering. Michael died young because you pushed him into military service he didn't want. Father drank himself to death because he couldn't bear the weight of your expectations. And now you're willing to let Thomas die alone, rather than admit you were wrong about me. I am trying to save this family. No. His voice cracked. You're trying to save your control over it, and I'm done letting you. He straightened, and in that moment, Elara saw the Duke he could have been. Powerful, commanding, unafraid. Here are my terms, Alistair said. I will see Thomas. I will stay with him for as long as he needs. Elara will remain by my side, as my wife, with all the respect that title demands. And when this is over, whether Thomas lives or dies, we will leave, together, and you will never contact us again. And if I refuse, then I walk out that door right now, and you can explain to Amelia why her uncle chose pride over family. The Dowager's hand trembled, rattling the sherry glass. You're bluffing, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Try me. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring, and then slowly the Dowager set down her glass. You have 1 week, she said coldly. After that, I want you both gone from this house. Permanently. Alistair nodded once. Agreed. He turned and walked out, Elara at his side. Behind them, they heard the sound of breaking glass. Thomas's fever broke on the 4th day. It happened just before dawn, when the world was caught between darkness and light. Elara had been dozing in a chair by the bed, Alistair beside her, both of them exhausted from days of vigil. The doctor had come and gone, shaking his head grimly. There's nothing more to be done, he'd said. It's in God's hands now. But when Elara woke to find Thomas's eyes open, clear, focused, fever-free, she realized God's hands had been gentler than expected. Miss Vance? The boy whispered. How you're still here? She moved to his bedside, tears streaming down her face. Of course I'm still here, sweetheart. Uncle Alistair? Right here, Tommy. Alistair appeared on the other side of the bed, his voice rough with emotion. Right here. Thomas's small hand reached for his uncle's. You came back. I did. Are you staying? Alistair glanced at Elara, and she saw the truth in his eyes. The answer neither of them wanted to give. For now, Alistair said gently. But when you're well, we have to go. Why? Because, he struggled for words. Because sometimes loving someone means making hard choices. Thomas frowned, processing this with the seriousness only sick children possess. Then he looked at Elara. Do you love Uncle Alistair? He asked. Yes, she said simply. And he loves you? Yes. Then you should stay together. He said it as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. That's what Mama used to say. That love is the only thing that matters. Alistair's composure shattered. He bent over the bed, gathering his nephew in a careful embrace, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Elara wrapped her arms around both of them, and for a moment the three of them held each other against the weight of loss and love and everything in between. When Alistair finally pulled back, his face was wet, but his eyes were clear. You're right, he said to Thomas. Your mama was a very wise woman. So you'll stay together? Yes. Promise? I promise. Thomas smiled, the first real smile Elara had seen from him in weeks, and closed his eyes. Within moments, he was asleep. But this time, it was the peaceful sleep of healing, not the fevered restlessness of illness. The crisis had passed. They left Blackwood Manor on the 7th day. Thomas was sitting up, eating broth, arguing with Amelia about whose turn it was to choose the bedtime story. The doctor declared him on the mend. The danger had passed, and the dowager's deadline had arrived. Ilara and Alistair said their goodbyes in the nursery. Amelia clung to Ilara, weeping. "Why can't you stay? Tommy's better now. Everything can go back to normal." "This is normal for us now, sweet girl." Ilara knelt, brushing tears from the child's face. "But we'll write, every week, and when you're older, you can come visit us in Scotland. Promise?" "I promise." Thomas hugged his uncle fiercely. "Thank you for coming back." "Thank you for fighting," Alistair whispered. The dowager did not come to see them off. They rode away from Blackwood as the sun set, the manor shrinking in the distance until it was nothing but a shadow on the horizon. Alistair took Ilara's hand. "No regrets?" She looked at him, this man who had chosen her over everything, and smiled. "Not a single one." The coach carried them north, toward Scotland, toward Ravencroft, toward a life they would build together. And behind them, in the nursery of a great estate, two children pressed their faces to the window and waved until the coach disappeared. Love, they had learned, was not about staying. It was about choosing who you stayed with. 5 years later, spring came to Ravencroft like a promise kept. The cottage had changed. Ivy still climbed the stone walls, but now there was a second wing, modest, hand-built by Alistair during their first winter together. A proper garden flourished where wild grasses once grew, bursting with vegetables and herbs and roses that Ilara had coaxed from cuttings. A wooden fence marked the property's edge, and beyond it, the loch still stretched black and silver beneath the Scottish sky. But the biggest change was the laughter. It rang out from the garden, bright and unrestrained, a child's laughter, pure as birdsong. Ilara stood at the kitchen window, her hands dusted with flour, watching her daughter chase butterflies through the lavender. Rose was 3 years old, with Alistair's dark eyes and Ilara's wild curls. She moved through the world with the fearless curiosity of a child who had never known anything but love. "Mama, look," she called, cupping something carefully in her small hands. "A ladybird." Ilara smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Bring her here, sweetheart." "Let me see." Rose ran to the window, her bare feet muddy, her dress grass-stained. She opened her palms to reveal a perfect red ladybird, wings folded, resting peacefully. "She's beautiful," Ilara said. "Like you," Rose declared, with the absolute conviction of a toddler. Then she kissed the bug and released it, watching it fly away with solemn reverence. Ilara's throat tightened with the kind of love that hurt, the good kind, the kind that reminded you how much you had to lose and how much you'd gained. Behind her, the kitchen door opened. Alistair entered, sawdust in his hair, his sleeves rolled up, carrying an armful of firewood. He looked older, lines around his eyes, silver threading through his dark hair, but lighter, too, as if the years had stripped away weight instead of adding it. "Is she terrorizing the local wildlife again?" he asked, grinning. "Always." Ilara crossed to him, brushing sawdust from his shoulder. "How's the bookshelf coming?" "Almost finished. Just needs sanding." He set down the wood and pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And how's my other project coming?" Ilara's hand moved instinctively to her belly, still flat, but not for long. "Growing, quietly, for now." His eyes widened. "You're sure?" "The midwife confirmed it yesterday." Alistair's face transformed, joy, wonder, fear, all at once. He dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to her stomach, his hands gentle on her hips. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your papa. And I promise you will know nothing but love." Ilara's fingers threaded through his hair, tears streaming down her face. 5 years ago she had been a governess with nothing but a worn dress and borrowed hope. Now she was a wife, a mother, a woman who had chosen love and been chosen in return. It was everything. The letters arrived every month, like clockwork. Amelia wrote in flowing script now, her handwriting elegant and assured. She was 16, preparing for her debut into society, navigating the world of balls and suitors with the sharp wit Ilara remembered. Thomas's letters were shorter, filled with sketches of birds and landscapes, his words careful and thoughtful. He was 13, healthy, thriving, the fever a distant nightmare. They wrote of their lives at Blackwood, of the new Duke, a distant cousin who had assumed the title after Alistair's renunciation, of the Dowager, who had grown quieter, more fragile, haunted by choices she could not undo. And they wrote of their plans. This summer they would visit. The Dowager had finally, grudgingly, given her consent. Or perhaps she simply no longer had the strength to fight. Ilara and Alistair had prepared for months, cleaning the cottage, building extra beds, planning meals. Rose talked of nothing else. "When are the big children coming?" she asked every day. "Soon," Ilara would promise. "Very soon." They arrived on a golden afternoon in June. The carriage appeared at the edge of the property, kicking up dust, and Ilara's heart lodged in her throat. Alistair stood beside her, his hand gripping hers, both of them trembling. The door opened. Amelia stepped out first, no longer a child but a young woman poised and beautiful in a travelling dress of pale green. But when she saw Alistair, all that composure shattered. "Uncle!" she cried, and ran. Alistair caught her, lifting her off the ground despite her protests that she was too old for such things. She clung to him, weeping, and he held her as if she were still the broken girl who had once clutched his hand in a nursery. Thomas emerged next, tall, lanky, all awkward adolescent limbs, but his eyes were bright, clear, alive. He walked to Alistair slowly, formally, and extended his hand. Alistair stared at it. Then he pulled the boy into a fierce embrace. "You came back," Thomas whispered. "I never really left," Alistair said hoarsely, and then Amelia turned to Ilara. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two women who had survived impossible things. Then Amelia stepped forward and hugged her, hard. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Ilara couldn't speak. She just held the girl, no, the young woman, and wept. They stayed for 3 weeks. The cottage was too small, too chaotic, too loud, and perfect. Amelia helped Ilara in the garden, chattering about suitors and scandals, laughing in ways she never had at Blackwood. Thomas followed Alistair everywhere, learning to build and fish and exist in a world where titles didn't matter. And Rose adored them. She clung to Amelia, demanding stories and songs. She followed Thomas like a shadow, marvelling at his drawings. One evening, as the sun set over the loch, they all sat together on the cottage porch. Alistair and Ilara, Amelia and Thomas, Rose curled asleep in her mother's lap. "Do you ever regret it?" Amelia asked quietly. "Leaving Blackwood?" Alistair looked at Ilara, at the cottage, at the children they had gathered like wildflowers. "Not once," he said, "even though you gave up everything." "I gave up a title," he corrected gently. "I gained a life." Thomas spoke then, his voice thoughtful. "Grandmother says you abandoned your duty." "I know." "But you didn't, did you?" The boy looked up, his gaze piercing. "You just chose a different one." Alistair's throat worked. "Yes, I suppose I did." Amelia reached over and took his hand. "Then I'm glad you chose it." And in that moment, bathed in golden light, surrounded by people who loved him not for his name but for his heart, Alistair felt something he had never felt at Blackwood. Peace. On the last day, as the children packed to leave, Amelia pulled Ilara aside. "I have something to tell you," she said, her eyes bright with mischief. "Lady Catherine Ashford, the woman grandmother wanted Uncle Alistair to marry." "Yes?" "She married last month. A baron from Yorkshire, very respectable, very boring." Amelia grinned. "And rumour has it she told her friends she was relieved Uncle Alistair chose you. That she'd heard he was inconveniently principled, and she preferred a husband who cared more about hunting than feelings." Ilara burst out laughing, bright, liberating laughter that startled the birds from the trees. "So everyone wins," she said. "Everyone wins," Amelia agreed. They stood in the yard, watching the carriage disappear down the road, waving until it was nothing but a speck. Rose tugged Ilara's skirt. "Will they come back?" "Yes, darling, they'll always come back." Alistair lifted Rose onto his shoulders, and together the three of them walked back to the cottage. That night, after Rose was asleep, Ilara and Alistair sat by the fire. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if I hadn't come to Ravencroft? If I'd stayed in London?" "Every day," he admitted. "And every day I thank God you didn't." She leaned into him, his arm wrapping around her, her head resting on his shoulder. Outside, the loch reflected the stars, infinite, eternal, constant. Inside, the fire crackled, warm and golden. And in the quiet of that cottage, far from titles and legacies, and the weight of other people's expectations, two people who had chosen love sat together in the life they had built. It was not grand, it was not powerful, it was not a legacy that would be written in history books, but it was theirs, and that was enough.